Yeah, that was actually one of the things that I really enjoyed when you were talking about, man, what was it? It was like systemic racism on in the debate with Destiny, and I was like really happy to hear. Do you consider yourself a right winger?
I do. I do still consider myself right wing. I think that whenever it comes down to labels, I think I am more socially liberal than I used to be, significantly so, as my opinions on social issues have evolved. I have moved more left, but I am, even on the political compass, and I know that's not completely accurate, I am still to the right of center.
Yeah, same. I started the podcast because I noticed I was stuck in an echo chamber, and I didn't know if I was wrong or not. I couldn't know. And so I wanted other people to come on, because even if I listen to somebody on, in another podcast or another show that's on the left discuss things, I would have a million questions for everything that they said. So I needed somebody to actually talk to understand exactly why somebody on the left would believe these things. And I did very quickly move farther left almost immediately. And watching your debate, it's so rare to see people who can believe anything that's common on the left. And you did really well in the debate. Like it was awesome to watch you on there with Destiny, who normally crushes people. And you guys ended up agreeing on like everything, which was also very good, because again, thinks his positions through very thoroughly. And so it's just so hard to hear somebody like admit that there is something like systemic racism on the right, because they see that as condemnation of white people. And I had to come to terms with that eventually as well, and say, oh, this like isn't actually anything against me. It's just the system in general. But I have trouble explaining this to other right wingers. So how, in like a super simple version, how would you explain systemic racism to a hardcore Trumper?
I honestly don't understand why right wingers really have such a problem acknowledging systematic racism in our country, because one of the biggest talking points that I hear as a pro-life activist, and the majority of pro-life activists are right-wing. All of the original pro-life organizations are very far-right religious organizations. One of the biggest talking points that we make as pro-life activists is that the abortion industry targets minority communities, specifically Black communities, that Planned Parenthood was built on racism. Their founder was racist, seeking to exterminate the Black community, that she worked alongside the KKK, that they were trying to abort all the Black babies, sterilize all the Black women, and wipe out the Black population. So I don't understand how someone that acknowledges that this long time system that is ingrained in our society and is still targeting minority communities and overwhelmingly targeting the Black community, how they can see that and use that argument so consistently, but then turn around and say that there is no systematic racism and that racism is not a problem in our country. Abortion is woven into the fabric of our society. People will fight tooth and nail to defend it. It is part of our culture. So to say that the abortion industry is inherently racist and it is a part of our culture, is a system of our culture that is used to oppress the Black community, and then turn around and say that there are no systems in place that oppress the Black community, is you're contradicting yourself. So I really don't understand why right-wingers really struggle so much to acknowledge that there is systematic racism, not just against the Black community. There are many other instances where we can talk about minority communities being systematically oppressed by our government and by our culture, that they refuse to acknowledge because they think that it's condemning white people. We're not condemning white people, we're condemning the oppression of people that aren't white.
Right. Well, and systematic racism isn't normally like an individual working against Black people, but it's a system that just perpetuates itself. And the Ben Shapiro straw man that is brought up all the time is, show me the system and the person in the system who is perpetuating the racism, and I will stand with you and fight against that. That's the right-wing talking point, is I will stand here with you and fight against the racism when you show it to me. But you can't just say, oh, the system's racist, because I can't fight against a system that I can't see. There's nothing to pinpoint that system. The issue with this argument is that it's a system. It's a million little things in there that all wind up being some big thing. And normally I try to explain it, because my come to Jesus moment with systematic racism was when I was making the conservative video that every conservative YouTuber has to make. Okay, it was made a million times before me. I didn't know at the time it was already made a million times, but I was making the video saying that because of socioeconomic issues, Black people have been put into bad situations to where you're going to make less money, which means and you also have a high divorce rate or single parent rate, where that automatically means you're like 10 times more likely to do the same things and end up getting divorced again, or having a baby out of wedlock again, or not graduating from high school, or going to jail, or being a repeat offender, or not being able to keep a stable job. And I'm making this argument and saying, like, see, like, it's obvious that Black people are actually hurting themselves, and like, you can see it in the stats. It's obvious. Just these are hardcore statistics that people on the left just refuse to acknowledge. And as I'm making this video, I had already written out the script. I don't know what took me so long. But as I'm making this video and I finish like my voiceover, and I get to the end and I listen to it, and I stop and I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, I'm literally saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But if you are raised in a single parent household, you're automatically more likely to have this, and this happen to you. So I'm admitting that that's a thing. I'm admitting that you have no control over this, that it's going to happen if you're outside of a two-parent household. You're going to have these things happen to you, but at the same time tell you to just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do the right thing. And I listen to myself say this, and I'm like, oh my goodness, how did I miss this whole time? Like, how am I making two arguments that argue against each other this whole time? It blew my mind. It's just like, it totally set me on a completely different path in the way that I talk to people and get into it with them on these. Most people on the left will turn around and say, like, oh, well, these are actually alt-right dog whistles or something like that you're using, and you're just a racist. I don't think I was a racist. I just didn't understand. Like, it didn't click for me yet. Is there a point that you can look to say, like, oh, this is when it kind of clicked for me?
I don't know if it was like one like single solitary point, like with you, where it's like it just kind of clicked. I think for me it was more gradual. I think that the refusal to acknowledge systematic racism was one of the things that, like, I started to question, and as I started to question it, conservatives kind of started pushing me out. I mean, it was one of many things. It's one of those things, like, if you're a conservative and a Republican, you don't question these things. This is what we believe, and these are our opinions, and you don't question those opinions. So whenever I started questioning, like, maybe there is something to the argument about systematic racism and police brutality and how it affects the Black community at a higher percentage than the white community, because the Black community is so much smaller than the white community. And whenever I started putting these ideas out there, instead of me having those ideas met with, like, let's have a conversation about this, they were just shutting me down. I'm like, well, if people don't want to talk about it, Like, if they're so quick to shut it down and they don't want to have a discussion about it, to me, that sends off like warning bells in my mind, like maybe that this is something that I should look further into. And so I did. And upon, reflection and looking more into it, it was just a gradual, like, oh, so, Republicans were saying this, but in actuality, they're actually wrong. And just over and over and over again, they were wrong about that. And this statistic is being used out of context and blah, 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 so on and so forth. And I just came to the conclusion, like, yes, there is a problem here. There's a serious issue with this in our country, and it's going completely unaddressed. The left likes to say that they're addressing it, but no, they're just using it to pander. Nobody is actually helping the Black community at this point, and I actually find that incredibly heartbreaking.